Black Waitress realized what the mob didn't, and saved the mob boss before. It was just another ordinary night at the high-end Italian restaurant, a place where the rich and powerful dined in the lap of luxury. Waitresses like Tasha had learned to keep their heads down, blend into the background, and stay out of the way. She had been working there for 2 years, just trying to make ends meet, doing her best to remain invisible to the high-rolling clients. Tasha was a woman who had learned the art of invisibility in the world of power and wealth. Her uniform was always immaculate, her smile polite, her presence as quiet as the whispers in the room. But tonight was different. As she walked through the dimly lit dining area, carrying a tray of appetizers to the VIP section, her eyes caught something that made her pause. A conversation between 2 men in expensive suits that was far from ordinary. One of them was Dante Romano, the infamous mob boss, known for his ruthless control over the criminal underworld. His presence alone commanded respect, and people knew to avoid crossing him. But it wasn't just Dante that caught her attention. It was the other man, sitting next to him, a face she hadn't seen before, but one that looked vaguely familiar. She tried to brush it off and focus on her task, but something about the conversation made her stop in her tracks. She could hear whispers, subtle words exchanged in low tones, but enough to make her heart race. They were talking about a hit, a plan to eliminate one of their own. Dante was in danger. She wasn't supposed to overhear this. Waitstaff were supposed to be invisible, to stay out of the way. But Tasha had spent too many years observing, learning how to read the room. And tonight, her instincts were screaming at her to act. She knew it was dangerous to get involved, especially with someone like Dante Romano. He was not a man to be trifled with. Yet, as she stood there, frozen for a moment, she realized the gravity of the situation. She was the only one who knew what was going to happen. And if she didn't do something, it would be too late. Tasha's mind raced. She quickly set the tray down on the nearest table, her eyes darting to the men as they continued their conversation, oblivious to her presence. She had a choice to make: stay silent and let the mob boss fall victim to a betrayal, or risk everything to warn him. It was a decision that would change her life forever. And as the seconds ticked away, Tasha made her choice. She couldn't just stand by and watch. She had to act. But how? The mob boss, the man who controlled everything in the room, was unknowingly walking into his own demise. The clock was ticking, and Tasha had only moments to figure out how to warn him without getting caught in the crossfire. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve hardening. She had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She couldn't let this go unnoticed. Tonight, her quiet life was about to collide with the dangerous world of the mob, and she had no choice but to step into the chaos. Tasha stood there for a moment, frozen in place. Her mind raced, her heart pounded in her chest. The realization of what she had just overheard was sinking in. Dante Romano, the feared mob boss, the man who controlled half of the city with a single word, was being targeted by his own people. Her instinct told her to run, to disappear into the background like she always did, but there was something in the air tonight, something that couldn't be ignored. She had to make a choice. She could walk away, act as if she hadn't heard a thing, or she could risk everything to warn him. She had always been a woman of survival, blending into the background, keeping her head low. But this time, things were different. The mafia's dark world was never one she wanted to be part of. She had heard stories, seen the way people came and went from the restaurant, some never seen again. But tonight, Tasha couldn't turn a blind eye. It wasn't just about her own safety anymore. It was about doing what was right. As she moved towards the kitchen to gather herself, the sounds of clinking silverware and the murmur of conversations around her seemed distant, like they were happening in another world. The weight of the decision was pressing down on her chest. She had seen how people like Dante operated. He was not the kind of man who took kindly to being warned, especially by someone like her, just a waitress in a fancy restaurant. But what she had overheard was too serious to ignore. There was a betrayal happening right under his nose, and it could cost him his life. She knew that if she went to him directly, it would raise suspicion. No one in this world trusted anyone, especially not a lowly waitress. But she had to find a way to reach him, to make him understand that she wasn't just another servant in the shadows. She was trying to save his life. The kitchen door swung open, and she stepped inside. The head chef, a gruff man who rarely spoke, was giving her a quick glance before turning back to his work. He knew Tasha well enough to see that something was off. Her usual calm demeanor was replaced with a tense energy that he had never seen before. But there was no time to explain. She had to act fast. Tasha grabbed a dish and, with trembling hands, made her way back to the VIP section. She could feel the eyes of the other staff members on her, the weight of their curiosity heavy in the air. But Tasha didn't care. She had one goal now, to warn Dante. As she approached the table where he sat, she could feel the gaze of his piercing eyes on her before she even reached them. She stopped a few feet away, trying to steady her nerves. Dante Romano, seated with his back straight and an air of indifference, looked up at her. His expression was cold, but there was something in his eyes, an intensity that made her heart race. "Can I help you?" His voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it, one that she had seen in the eyes of predators before. "Sir," Tasha began, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to speak with you. It's important." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze never leaving her face. "Important? You've got a lot of nerve, coming to me like this." Tasha swallowed hard, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This was it. There was no turning back now. "I overheard something, sir. Something you need to know." Dante studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're lucky you're still breathing after this." "Little stunt," he muttered, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his gaze. "What is it that you overheard?" Tasha's heart was racing, but she pressed on. "There's a hit on you, sir. One of your own men is planning to take you out." Dante's expression didn't change, but she could see the slight shift in his posture. He was listening now. She continued quickly, "I don't know all the details, but it's happening tonight. They've set everything up." For a brief moment, she thought he might laugh or dismiss her, but instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping slowly on the table. "Is that so?" he said, his voice low. "And how do you know this?" "I overheard your men talking. They think you're too caught up in the dinner, too distracted to notice," Tasha said, feeling the weight of her words. "They've been planning it for weeks." Dante's face remained unreadable, but his eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place. Anger, or perhaps respect? She wasn't sure. "You think you can just walk in here and save me?" he asked, the challenge clear in his tone. "I don't know how much I can trust you." Tasha stood her ground, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. "You don't have a choice, sir. They're planning to take you down tonight. If you don't act now, it's over." For the first time since she had approached him, Dante smiled, just a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're a bold one," he said softly. "But you're right. We've got work to do." Tasha's breath caught in her throat as he stood up, his eyes never leaving her face. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tasha," she replied quickly. "Tasha, huh?" He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning her face as if calculating something. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. Let's see if you're worth your weight in gold." With that, Dante turned and walked away, leaving Tasha standing there, her heart still racing, unsure of what would come next. She had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And now, the game had truly begun. Tasha's mind was racing as she watched Dante Romano walk away from her, his dark eyes still fixed on her. The words she had spoken, the risk she had taken, all of it was now in motion. The mob boss, the man who had controlled this city with an iron fist, was now relying on her. She had warned him, but the real challenge had only just begun. As Dante made his way to the back of the restaurant with his men in tow, Tasha felt a mix of fear and excitement in her chest. She had never imagined this day would come, where she, a mere waitress, would be at the center of the storm. She had always stayed out of the way, but tonight, she had stepped into the heart of the danger. Tasha quickly turned and made her way to the kitchen, trying to gather her thoughts. The chef, noticing the tense look on her face, gave her a questioning glance, but Tasha didn't respond. She couldn't. She needed to focus. As she grabbed a few empty plates, she took a deep breath. The situation was spiraling fast. She knew what she had heard, but did she know enough to stop the hit? Was it possible to get through to Dante in time? And if she succeeded, what would happen to her? Would the mafia boss keep his word, or would he see her as a liability, someone who had crossed a dangerous line? Tasha's thoughts were interrupted when a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Dante standing in the kitchen doorway, his presence commanding the entire room. He wasn't alone. His two bodyguards stood behind him, their eyes scanning the space, alert and focused. Dante's eyes were cold, but there was something different in the way he looked at her now, a mixture of respect and suspicion. "Tasha," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk. Now." Her stomach churned, but she nodded and followed him out of the kitchen. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath, the tension thick in the air. As they moved through the narrow hallway toward the back office, Tasha couldn't help but notice the way the other staff members watched them. They were all curious, whispering among themselves. But Tasha knew she couldn't afford to care about them now. This was about survival. As they entered the small office, Dante closed the door behind him, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet building. He walked over to the desk, and his bodyguards remained standing near the door, keeping watch. Dante's eyes never left Tasha's face as he took a seat. "So, what exactly did you overhear?" he asked, his tone sharper than before. Tasha hesitated for a moment, then took a step forward, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "I heard one of your men talking about the hit. I didn't catch all the details, but they've been planning it for weeks. It's happening tonight." Dante's expression remained unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling as he stared at her. "And how do I know you're not just trying to set me up?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "Because I don't want anything from you. I'm just trying to keep you alive." Tasha felt the weight of her words, the truth of them hanging in the air between them. Dante studied her for a long time, as if weighing her every word. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and almost thoughtful. "All right, Tasha, you've got my attention, but I need you to tell me everything you know. Now." Tasha nodded, then quickly relayed everything she had overheard. The plan, the details she could remember, the way the hit had been set up, all of it. She didn't leave out a single piece of information. Dante listened intently, his eyes narrowing as she spoke. When she finished, there was a long silence. Tasha could feel the tension building in the room, the weight of Dante's gaze on her. "You've done your part," he finally said. "Now we move." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what that meant, but it was clear that this was no longer just about a warning. Dante stood up, his bodyguards following his lead. "Get ready," he said to Tasha. "You're coming with us." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. Coming with them? What did he mean? She didn't have time to ask questions as Dante motioned for her to follow him. As they made their way out of the office and back into the main dining area, Tasha could feel the eyes of everyone on her. The tension in the air was almost palpable. She was no longer just a waitress. She was now a part of something much bigger than herself, something far more dangerous. The night was just beginning, and Tasha had no idea where it would take her. All she knew was that the mob boss had trusted her, and she had to see it through, no matter the cost. Tasha had no idea what to expect as she followed Dante through the dimly lit halls of the restaurant. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she couldn't shake the feeling that every step she took was leading her deeper into a world she could never escape. The staff watched them as they passed, their eyes filled with curiosity, but Tasha didn't dare look back. She had just made a choice that could change everything. Dante walked with a calm confidence, his expression unreadable. The bodyguards flanked him, scanning the room with a sharpness that made Tasha feel like a fish in a tank. Every movement they made was calculated, every glance cold and piercing. She was just a waitress, yet she was now at the center of their world. It felt surreal. They reached the back door, and Dante motioned for her to follow him outside. The night air was cooler than she expected, but the tension inside her was far more suffocating than the cold could ever be. As they stepped into the alley behind the restaurant, the sound of traffic and the city's bustle seemed miles away. It was just the three of them now, Dante, his two bodyguards, and Tasha. Dante turned to her. "We're heading to a safe house," he said, his voice steady. "You've done well so far, but the real work starts now. Stay close, and don't say a word unless I tell you to." Tasha nodded, her throat dry. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. As they made their way to the black SUV parked at the end of the alley, Tasha couldn't help but wonder why Dante had trusted her. She was just a waitress. She had no power, no experience in the world he lived in. But somehow, she had gained his attention. Dante climbed into the front seat of the vehicle, and his bodyguards followed suit. Tasha hesitated for a moment before climbing into the back. The doors shut behind her, and the vehicle roared to life. As the car sped through the streets, Tasha's mind raced. What was the plan? How did she fit into it? She could feel the weight of the decision she had made earlier pressing down on her. She had risked everything to warn Dante, but now she had to prove that she was more than just a woman who had overheard a conversation. Dante turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. I need you to listen carefully, he said, his voice firm. You'll be staying with me for the next few days. We have to lay low. Trust no one, not even your friends. If you do, they'll put you in danger. Understand? Tasha swallowed hard, her stomach churning. I understand, she replied quietly. Good, Dante said, his eyes flickering back to the road. The drive felt long, the city lights flashing by in a blur. Tasha tried to steady her breath, but her mind kept racing. She had been pulled into a world that was far darker than anything she had ever known. The car finally came to a stop outside an inconspicuous building in a quieter part of town. Dante got out first, followed by his bodyguards. Tasha hesitated, unsure of what to expect. The building didn't look like much from the outside, but she knew better than to judge it by appearances. It could be the safest place in the city, or it could be a trap. Dante motioned for her to follow him again, and she did, her footsteps echoing in the hallway as they entered the building. The interior was stark, with dim lighting and plain furniture. It looked like a safe house, functional but not comfortable. This is where we'll stay for now, Dante said, his voice calm. It's not luxurious, but it's secure. We'll figure out our next move from here. Tasha nodded, her nerves still on edge. What's the plan? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante looked at her, his gaze intense. You're going to help me take down the man who's trying to kill me. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't ready for this. She had been in the restaurant world, the world of dishes, drinks, and serving people who never looked twice at her. But now, she was involved in something much bigger, something far more dangerous. Dante walked over to a small table in the corner of the room, where a laptop sat. He opened it, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he typed. We have to move quickly, he said, his tone more serious than ever. I know who's behind this. It's not just a random hit. It's a power play. Tasha watched him, unsure of what to say. She had no experience with things like this, power plays, betrayal, mafia politics. But she knew one thing. She couldn't back out now. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. Dante looked up at her, his face unreadable. You're in this now, he said, his voice low. So, you better get used to it. Trust me, there's no going back. Tasha nodded silently, her heart racing. She had just stepped into a world she didn't understand, and now, she was in too deep to back out. The question was, would she survive it? As Tasha sat in the small, dimly lit room, the weight of her decision was heavier than ever. Dante had left her in the safe house with his bodyguards, instructing her to stay put and wait for further instructions. The place felt like a cage, safe but suffocating. Tasha couldn't help but think about how her life had changed so drastically in just a few days. She had gone from being a quiet waitress at a fancy restaurant to being at the center of a deadly mafia plot. She could hardly believe it. The same man who had once been the figure of power and fear in the city was now relying on her. Dante, the ruthless mob boss, had put his trust in her. Tasha still wasn't sure why. What did she have that could be of value to him? She was just a woman who happened to overhear a conversation. Yet, here she was, in a safe house, surrounded by men who could end her life with a single word. The door opened, and one of the bodyguards entered. Tasha looked up, her nerves on edge. Dante wants to see you, he said curtly. Tasha stood up, her legs unsteady, and followed the bodyguard down the narrow hallway. Her heart raced with every step. She was about to meet Dante again, and she still had no idea what to expect. The bodyguard led her to a large, dimly lit room at the end of the hall. The atmosphere was heavy, the air thick with tension. Dante was standing near a table covered with papers and maps, looking more like a general than a mafia boss. His sharp eyes lifted as Tasha entered, and for a moment, their gazes locked. Tasha couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. There was something cold, calculating, and dangerous about him. Yet, there was also something else, something that hinted at a deeper layer beneath his hardened exterior. Dante motioned for her to sit, and she did so cautiously. He wasted no time in getting to the point. You were right, he said, his voice low and steady. The hit is real. We've confirmed it. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. Who's behind it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante's gaze hardened as he leaned over the table, his fingers brushing across the papers. A man named Victor DeMarco. He's a former associate, someone I thought I could trust. But I was wrong. He's planning to take over my operations, and he's using my own men to do it. Tasha felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How could someone so close to Dante betray him like this? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that betrayal was a part of the world she had just entered, a world where loyalty was as fleeting as trust. Dante continued, "We have to move quickly. DeMarco is making his move tonight. If we don't act fast, I'll be the one to fall." Tasha felt a weight on her chest. She had been warned of the danger, but now it was real. She had no choice but to help him. The decision had been made the moment she overheard the conversation in the restaurant. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Dante looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I need you to help me get close to DeMarco's inner circle. You're the one who overheard the plan, so you're the only one who can help me infiltrate his group. I need someone on the inside." Tasha's heart raced. She had no experience in the world of mafia intrigue, no connections, no knowledge of how to navigate this dangerous game. But Dante's trust in her was enough to drive her forward. She couldn't back down now. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm. Dante nodded, his lips curling into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Good. We'll need to move fast, and you'll have to be careful. DeMarco will never see it coming." The room fell silent as they both understood the gravity of the situation. Tasha's mind was whirling. She had just entered a world that was far beyond her, a world of danger, deception, and violence. But she had made a choice, and there was no turning back now. "When do we start?" she asked. Dante looked at her, his eyes hardening. "Right now," he said. "We can't waste any time. We need to stop him before it's too late." Tasha stood up, ready to face whatever was coming next. She wasn't sure how she had ended up here, but she knew one thing. She was in this fight now, and she wasn't backing down. Dante turned to the bodyguards and gave them a few orders, and within moments, they were on their way. The night was dark, and the city was alive with the sounds of traffic and distant voices. Tasha could feel the weight of what was about to unfold, but she couldn't let fear stop her. She had made a promise to herself to survive. And in a world like this, survival was the only thing that mattered. As the night went on, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that everything was moving too fast. They had already arrived at one of Dante's safe houses, a location that seemed harmless at first glance, but was anything but. There was no time to waste, though. She had already made her choice. Now she had to see it through, no matter the danger or uncertainty. Tasha sat quietly in the corner of the small, windowless room as Dante and his bodyguards reviewed the plans. Maps, photos, and information about Victor DeMarco were scattered across the table. She had no experience with things like this, but she was about to become a player in a world that she had only heard about in whispers. "DeMarco's made his move," Dante said, his voice sharp, his eyes flicking from one bodyguard to the next. "He's got the muscle, but we've got the intel." He glanced over at Tasha, who was trying to focus on the details in front of her. "You're going to need to get close to him, Tasha. If you do this right, you'll be in a position to feed me the information I need." Tasha's stomach tightened. She had never thought she would be involved in something like this, an undercover operation in the dangerous underworld of organized crime. But there was no going back now. She nodded, trying to mask the fear that was rising inside of her. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady despite the turbulence she felt. Dante's gaze softened slightly. "You've got the skills, Tasha. You're a natural at reading people. Use that. You'll be fine." Tasha wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure her or if he truly believed in her abilities. Either way, it didn't matter. She had no choice but to trust him. The plan was simple. Get close to Victor DeMarco, blend into his inner circle, and feed Dante the information he needed to shut him down before the hit was carried out. The key was to keep everything under the radar, stay unnoticed, and make sure DeMarco never suspected a thing. But Tasha knew this wasn't going to be easy. DeMarco wasn't just any criminal. He was ambitious, smart, and ruthless. Dante had trusted her with this, and she couldn't let him down. "We'll start tomorrow night," Dante continued, his voice low and calm. I'll have everything in place. You just focus on getting the information. Stay alert, and don't let your guard down for a second." Tasha nodded again, her mind racing with the possibilities. She had to be careful. One wrong move, and it would all fall apart. "How do I even get close to him?" Tasha asked. Dante smiled, but it wasn't the usual cold smile that Tasha had grown accustomed to. There was a hint of approval in it, as if he was impressed by her directness. "You already are close," he said. "DeMarco doesn't trust easily, but he's always looking for new allies, new people to bring into his operation. You're going to be the one he least expects. That's your advantage." Tasha's heart beat faster. She was about to step into a dangerous game where every move had to be calculated, every word carefully chosen. But she wasn't backing down. Dante walked over to the table, picking up a few files and handing them to Tasha. "These are your tools," he said. "Know them inside and out. We're going to hit him where it hurts, and we're going to do it quietly. No one can know what we're doing." Tasha took the files, her fingers brushing against the cold paper. The weight of what she was about to do was starting to sink in, but she couldn't hesitate. This was her chance to prove herself, to survive in a world where there was no room for weakness. "I'll do it," Tasha said, her voice unwavering. Dante nodded, his eyes locking with hers. "Good. I knew you would." As he turned to leave the room, his bodyguards following behind, Tasha stood there, staring at the files in her hands. She had never felt so alive and so terrified at the same time. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, and Tasha could feel the weight of her choices pressing down on her. This was no longer just about survival. It was about doing what was right in a world that didn't care about right or wrong. The next few days would change everything. Tasha didn't know if she would make it out of this unscathed, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to stop until she finished what she had started. She had already stepped into a world of shadows and danger, and now she had to play her part to the end. The following day, Tasha woke early, the weight of the situation still heavy on her shoulders. She had spent the night going over the files Dante had handed her, studying every piece of information carefully. The plan was simple: infiltrate Victor DeMarco's organization, gather intel, and feed it back to Dante. Easy, right? Tasha didn't think so. It was more than just walking into a room and pretending to be part of the team. This was about survival. She had to be smarter than DeMarco's men, move faster than they could catch on, and keep a cool head at all times. Every step was a risk, and there was no safety net. She wasn't part of this world, and that made her vulnerable. As she prepared herself, she couldn't help but feel the magnitude of what she was about to do. She had been living a quiet life, working at the restaurant, blending into the background. Now, she was about to become a key player in a deadly game where loyalty could get you killed, and trust was a luxury no one could afford. At that moment, she wasn't just a waitress. She was Dante's eyes and ears on the inside, and that came with a heavy responsibility. Dante had already made it clear that her role was crucial, but how far was he willing to go to protect her if things went wrong? Would he abandon her like the rest of the people in this world did when they no longer had use for you? Her mind raced, but she quickly pushed the thoughts aside. There was no room for doubt now. The clock was ticking, and DeMarco wasn't going to wait forever. Tasha was escorted to a meeting point, an upscale lounge that served as the perfect setting for business dealings and shady negotiations alike. It was the kind of place where people didn't ask questions. They just did business. As she entered the lounge, the dim lighting and smooth jazz playing in the background set an eerie mood. Tasha scanned the room quickly, her eyes landing on a few familiar faces. There were men in suits, their eyes darting between each other, and women who seemed out of place but clearly comfortable in their surroundings. She had never been in a place like this before, but she held her ground. A man at the bar gave her a brief nod, and Tasha knew it was time. Victor DeMarco sat at a corner table, his back to the wall, watching the room with an air of quiet authority. He was everything Tasha had imagined, a man of power, control, and cold calculation. His eyes, dark as night, locked onto her as she approached, and for a moment, she thought she might falter. But then she remembered Dante's words, "Stay alert. Don't let your guard down." She walked up to the table with a calm confidence, a smile barely curling at the edges of her lips. "Mr. DeMarco," she said smoothly, her voice steady. "I've heard a lot about you." DeMarco raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Have you now?" he replied, his voice smooth and deep, with a hint of amusement. And what have you heard? Only good things, Tasha said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. She needed to be bold, to command the same kind of respect the men around her had. DeMarco chuckled softly, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. You're confident, I'll give you that. Not many people come up to me like this. I'm not like most people, Tasha said, leaning in slightly. I've been around, seen things, and I know. Who's worth my time? She let that hang in the air for a moment, giving him the impression that she was more than just a pretty face. DeMarco seemed to consider her words for a moment before giving her a half smile. I like that, he said. You're exactly the kind of person I need in my circle. Tasha's heart raced, but she didn't let it show. This was it. She had to get him talking, keep him engaged, and draw out the information that Dante needed. She wasn't here for pleasantries. I'm interested in learning more, Tasha said, keeping her tone casual. About your operations, your plans. DeMarco studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. You think you can just walk in here and ask me about my plans? His voice had a sharp edge now, but Tasha wasn't intimidated. She kept her composure, knowing that if she showed any weakness, it would be over. I'm just trying to understand where I fit in, she said. I know how these things work. You've got people around you who are loyal, but loyalty only goes so far. I want to know if I can trust you. DeMarco's gaze softened slightly, the hint of a smile playing on his lips. You'll learn, my dear. You'll learn everything you need to know. Tasha could feel the game beginning. She was in, but she had to play it smart. She needed to keep him talking, get closer to the truth without showing her hand. The conversation continued, but in her mind, Tasha was already planning the next move. Every word, every glance, could be the key to the next piece of the puzzle. And as she sat there, listening to DeMarco's stories of ambition and power, she knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The deeper she got, the more dangerous it would become. But there was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and she was ready to see it through, no matter where it took her. The next few days felt like a blur for Tasha. She had managed to gain Victor DeMarco's trust, at least on the surface, but she could feel the weight of the game she was playing. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Every move, every word, had to be calculated. One wrong step, and she'd be gone. She had learned enough in the last few days to know that DeMarco was just as dangerous as Dante had warned her. He had the kind of cold, calculating intelligence that made him a formidable opponent. He didn't trust easily, but his ego was his weakness, and Tasha knew that she could use it. The safe house had become her base of operations, a place where she could regroup, review the intel, and prepare for the next step. Dante was more than just a boss to her now. He was her lifeline in this twisted game. She still wasn't sure why he had trusted her, but she couldn't afford to question it. She had a job to do. Each night, after she spent time with DeMarco, Tasha would return to the safe house, go over the details, and report back to Dante. She had become an expert at reading people, understanding what made them tick, what they wanted, and what they were hiding. But DeMarco was a puzzle she was still working to solve. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with DeMarco, Tasha received a message from Dante. It was short, but it carried a heavy weight. We need to move. DeMarco's too close to the edge. We don't have much time. She could feel the urgency in his words, the sense of impending danger. DeMarco was getting suspicious. He was watching her more closely now, asking questions she didn't have answers for. Tasha couldn't afford to slip up. She had to be perfect, to play the part of the loyal ally, while feeding Dante the information he needed to take DeMarco down. She had been playing this game for days, but the stakes were higher now. Time was running out. She needed to act. That night, Tasha went to meet DeMarco at one of his regular spots, a private backroom in a high-end club. She had learned that this was where he liked to meet with potential allies, people he trusted. She walked into the room, her heart pounding in her chest. DeMarco was already there, his back to the door, talking with a few of his men. When he turned and saw her, a small smile appeared on his lips. "Ah, Tasha, I was just waiting for you," he said smoothly. "Have a seat. We have business to discuss." Tasha nodded and sat down, her mind racing. She had to keep it together, to stay calm. "What's on your mind, Victor?" she asked, trying to sound casual, as if this was just another meeting. DeMarco leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about the loyalty in this business. People betray you, They take advantage of you, and they think they can get away with it. Tasha's stomach tightened. This wasn't about loyalty. This was about him suspecting something. What are you getting at? She asked, her voice steady despite the growing tension. DeMarco smiled darkly. I've been watching you, Tasha. You're not as careful as you think. You've been getting close to me, but I don't know if I trust you yet. And that makes me wonder, what side are you really on? Tasha's mind raced as she tried to control her breathing. This was the moment. She couldn't show fear. She couldn't back down. I'm on your side, she said, her voice unwavering. I've been loyal to you from the start. DeMarco didn't respond immediately. He just sat there, studying her, as if trying to decide whether or not she was telling the truth. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Then, finally, he stood up and walked to the window, his back turned to her. I want to believe you, he said softly. But I can't take any chances. You're going to prove your loyalty. Tasha held her breath. How? She asked, knowing that whatever he wanted, it wouldn't be easy. DeMarco turned back to face her, his eyes cold. You're going to get rid of someone for me, he said, his voice calm but deadly. Tasha's heart stopped. She had expected many things, but not this. She had to make a choice now, go along with it, or risk losing everything. Who? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A man named Marco. He's been feeding information to our enemies. I want you to make him disappear. Tasha froze. This was the line she hadn't wanted to cross. She had already risked everything to get close to DeMarco, but killing someone? That was different. She had never been a killer. But the truth was, she didn't have much of a choice. I'll do it, she said quietly, her voice steady, betraying nothing of the storm inside her. DeMarco smiled, a cold, satisfied smile. Good. I knew I could count on you. As Tasha left the meeting, her mind was a blur. She had just agreed to murder someone, and she wasn't sure if she could live with that. But there was no turning back now. She had crossed a line, and now she had to deal with the consequences. The game was far from over, and she was in it deeper than ever. Tasha's hands trembled as she stood outside the club where she was supposed to carry out the task. The moment she had been dreading was now at her doorstep. She had never thought she would get to this point, having to take a life. DeMarco's order was clear, get rid of Marco. He was a liability, a traitor in DeMarco's eyes, and she was to be the one to silence him. Tasha had already made up her mind that she would not back out, not after everything that had happened. The stakes had escalated too high, and there was no turning back now. She couldn't afford to show weakness. She wasn't sure if she would ever be able to forgive herself, but she couldn't let DeMarco see her hesitate. She had to complete this mission. The cold air bit at her skin as she approached the back entrance of the club. It was just another night for everyone inside. Another night of power plays, deals, and people whose lives were worth little more than a handshake. Tasha had become a part of this world, and tonight, her role was darker than she had ever imagined. Inside, the dim lights and steady music created a false sense of comfort, a stark contrast to the storm building in her mind. She could hear the faint sound of laughter from a group at the bar, but her attention was elsewhere. She spotted Marco, sitting alone at the far end of the room. His back was to her, oblivious to the threat that was about to close in on him. Tasha felt the tension in her chest tighten as she walked toward him. She had to get close, make him trust her, and make the kill quick and clean. As she approached, Marco turned slightly, noticing her. Hey there, he said with a smirk. You're new around here, aren't you? Tasha gave him a small smile, trying to keep her expression neutral. Just started, she replied. How about you? Marco laughed, clearly pleased by the attention. I've been around, he said, his voice low and confident. This place is full of interesting characters, don't you think? Tasha nodded, keeping her voice steady. I think I've seen enough to know who the players are. Marco leaned forward, clearly interested in her. Is that so? Well, I can help you figure out the ropes if you're looking for someone to show you the real business. Tasha kept her face impassive, her heart racing in her chest. She had to keep the conversation going. This was her moment to strike, but she couldn't rush it. She needed him to trust her, to feel like she was one of them. Maybe I could use some advice, she said, her voice soft and inviting. Marco leaned in closer, lowering his voice. Stick with the right people, and you'll be all right, he said, a wicked grin crossing his face. But don't trust everyone. There's always someone looking to take you down. Tasha's mind raced as she processed his words. It was clear he was trying to bring her into the fold, But Tasha wasn't here to make alliances. She was here to finish the job. Her hand brushed against the small weapon she had hidden in her jacket. It was time. Just as Marco turned to take a sip from his glass, Tasha reached into her jacket and pulled out the gun. She aimed at him quickly, the cold metal steady in her hand. Before he could even turn around fully, the silence shot echoed in her ear. Marco's body went limp, slumping over the table. Tasha felt a rush of adrenaline as she quickly stood up and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. It was done. Marco was no longer a threat, but she could feel the weight of what she had just done sinking in. She had just taken a life. The world felt unreal as she made her way out of the club, her mind still racing. She had completed the task, but there was no sense of triumph, no relief. Only the cold realization that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. As Tasha stepped into the cool night air, she saw Dante waiting in the shadows, his bodyguards close behind. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, there was a silent acknowledgement between them. She had done what was asked, but at what cost? It's done, she said quietly. Dante nodded, his face unreadable. Good. You did what needed to be done. Now we move forward. Tasha nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She had done the job, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just become a part of something much darker than she had ever imagined. As they walked back to the safe house, Tasha couldn't help but wonder where this path would lead her. Was she already too deep to turn back? The game had changed, and so had she. There was no going back to her old life now. The world of the mafia had claimed her, and there was no escape. As the days passed, the weight of what Tasha had done was never far from her mind. The sharp sting of taking a life, of silencing someone for good, lingered like a shadow that refused to leave her. She had completed the task, but something had changed within her. The lines between right and wrong had blurred in a way she couldn't ignore. Dante was pleased, of course. He had seen her as an asset, someone who could handle the pressure, and now, she had proven herself to him. But every time she looked at him, she saw more than just the powerful, ruthless mob boss. She saw the weight of the decisions he made, the consequences of the choices they both were living with. She had become a part of his world now, a world she hadn't asked to be in, but one she couldn't escape. As much as she tried to suppress the growing unease inside her, it only seemed to intensify. That night, Dante called her into the safe house. The air was thick with tension as he paced back and forth, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something more intense. He wasn't alone this time. Two of his trusted men stood by the door, their eyes constantly scanning the room. Tasha knew this wasn't a casual meeting. Something big was happening. Sit, Dante commanded, his voice colder than usual. Tasha complied, her heart pounding in her chest. She had learned quickly that when Dante got like this, it was best to listen closely and follow his lead. We've got a problem, Dante continued, finally stopping in front of her. DeMarco's men are closing in. They know we've been tracking their every move. Someone inside our circle is leaking information, and I need to find out who before it's too late. Tasha's mind raced. She had no idea how deep this betrayal went, but she knew one thing. Trust was in short supply in this world. How do we handle it? She asked, keeping her voice steady. Dante's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. We're going to flush them out. You're going to use what you've learned to get close to the ones who might be responsible. Tasha swallowed hard. She knew that getting close to the wrong person could cost her everything. But she also knew that this was her chance to prove that she was still useful to Dante. There was no going back now. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. Dante nodded, a slight flicker of approval in his eyes. Good. I knew I could count on you. He paused for a moment, then turned to his men. Get her everything she needs. We don't have time to waste. The next few days were a blur of meetings, surveillance, and tension. Tasha was placed in a position that allowed her to observe the others more closely, to see who was acting suspicious and who was showing signs of weakness. It didn't take long for her to pick up on the subtle shifts in behavior, the small, telling details that spoke volumes. One man, in particular, caught her attention. Marco, one of DeMarco's lieutenants, had been acting strangely. He was too quiet, too watchful, and Tasha could sense that he was hiding something. She spent the next few days working to get closer to him, to learn his secrets without arousing suspicion. It was a game of patience, and Tasha was learning how to play it. She spent hours listening to him talk, picking up on his likes and dislikes, his fears, his ambitions. Slowly, she started to see the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. He was nervous, but not about the things she expected. He was nervous about something else, something bigger than just loyalty or betrayal. She knew he was hiding something, but what? One night, as Tasha walked into the meeting room where Marco was waiting, she felt the tension between them rise to a boiling point. "I need you to tell me what's going on," she said, her voice quiet but demanding. Marco looked at her, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're hiding something," Tasha replied, moving closer. "You've been too quiet, too nervous. I can see it in your eyes. You're not as untouchable as you think." Marco shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, Tasha saw real fear in his eyes. "I'm not the one you should be worried about," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's DeMarco. He's planning something. Something bigger than any of us could imagine." Tasha's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I don't know all the details," Marco said, his voice shaking. "But he's working with people outside of the family, outside of everything. It's dangerous. I don't want any part of it." Tasha's mind raced. She had just uncovered something that could bring DeMarco down, something that would change everything. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this could be the very thing that got her killed. Marco was a liability now, and the only way out was to silence him before he could say more. But she wasn't sure she could do it. The game had just gotten much more complicated. Tasha stood there, caught in a moral bind, unsure of who she could trust and what the right thing to do was. The world she had stepped into was darker than she could have ever imagined. But as she stood there, facing Marco, she knew there was no way out. Not unless she played the game to the very end. Tasha's heart raced as she stood there, looking at Marco. He had just admitted that DeMarco was planning something far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. The moment had arrived. She had to make a choice. She could report this to Dante, trust that this information would help bring down DeMarco, or she could act on her own instincts and deal with Marco in a way that would make sure no one else heard what he had just confessed. Her mind raced as she stood there in the dimly lit room, Marco shifting uncomfortably before her. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. The tension between them was palpable. Tasha had learned how to mask her emotions, but right now, the weight of the decision was unbearable. If she took Marco out now, she might never find out more. But if she didn't act fast, DeMarco's plan could unravel everything she and Dante had worked for. "You're not making sense, Marco," she said, her voice steady. "What exactly is DeMarco planning?" Marco shook his head, his hands trembling. "I don't know all the details," he said, his voice low and strained. "But I've seen him talking to people, men from outside the family, men we don't know. He's planning to expand, to take control of more than just the city. And he's doing it by using everyone around him. I'm telling you, Tasha, if we don't stop him, it will be too late." Tasha took a deep breath, trying to process everything he had just told her. DeMarco was working with outsiders, expanding his operations, and making deals that could turn the city into something much darker. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about power, money, and the kind of influence that could destroy everything in its path. "I know you're scared," Tasha said, her tone softening. "But we need to work together. We need to figure out what's going on before it's too late. If you can tell me more about who he's working with, we might have a chance to stop him." Marco's eyes darted around the room, as if checking for anyone who might be listening. "I don't know their names," he whispered, "but I know they're planning something big. DeMarco's been getting more reckless lately. The meeting is happening tomorrow night, at the old warehouse by the docks. That's all I know. You need to stop him before it's too late." The words hit Tasha like a punch to the gut. The warehouse. It was a place she had passed by many times, a crumbling building at the edge of town that no one ever visited. But if DeMarco was meeting there with his unknown allies, it was a sign that things were coming to a head. She had to warn Dante. But how much of this could she trust? Was Marco telling the truth, or was he trying to set her up? The thought lingered in her mind, but there was no time to dwell on it. Marco was scared. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't lying. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "I'll make sure. Dante knows about this, but you're going to have to stay out of sight. If DeMarco is planning something like this, he's not going to hesitate to take you down." Marco nodded quickly, his fear evident. "I understand. I don't want to get involved any more than I have to. Just make sure you stop him." Tasha turned and walked towards the door, her mind already working through the next steps. The warehouse was the key to everything, but she couldn't go in without backup. She needed Dante's help, and she needed to move fast. As she stepped outside into the cold night, the chill in the air mirrored the tension in her chest. She had come too far to back down now. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a player in this dangerous game, and if she was going to survive, she had to outsmart everyone around her. When Tasha arrived at the safe house, she found Dante waiting for her, his expression unreadable. "Did you get the information?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," Tasha replied, stepping into the room and shutting the door behind her. "DeMarco's meeting with someone at the old warehouse by the docks tomorrow night. He's making moves, expanding his operations. He's working with outsiders, people we don't know." Dante's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the information. "That's the break we needed," he said, his tone sharp. "But we need to move fast. I'm not going to let DeMarco get the upper hand. Get ready. We're going in tonight." Tasha felt a surge of adrenaline as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just another meeting. This was the moment when everything changed. She was going in with Dante, into the heart of enemy territory, and there was no turning back. As they prepared to leave, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that this was the point of no return. She had already crossed a line, and now, there was no escaping the world she had become a part of. The game was on, and there was no turning back. The night air was thick with tension as Tasha and Dante prepared to leave the safe house. Everything had led to this moment. They had no choice but to move quickly. DeMarco's plan was in motion, and if they didn't act fast, it could be too late. Tasha's pulse quickened as she stepped into the car with Dante and his two bodyguards. The city's skyline blurred past, the streets lit by the dim glow of streetlights as they drove towards the warehouse. The feeling of unease was palpable, hanging in the air like a storm just waiting to break. Tasha had been to that warehouse before, though never with this much at stake. It was a crumbling building at the edge of the docks, far from the city's bustle, but just close enough to be a place of hidden dealings. As they approached, Tasha's mind raced. She had learned so much over the past few days, the secrets, the betrayals, the games that were being played behind the scenes. But now, with everything on the line, there was no room for mistakes. They had to move like shadows, silent, quick, and invisible. The car came to a stop outside the warehouse, and the air inside seemed to tighten even further. Dante looked at Tasha, his eyes cold and focused. "Remember," he said, his voice low. "Stay close, stay quiet, and do not engage unless I tell you to. This is bigger than you or me. We do this right, and we take DeMarco down." Tasha nodded, swallowing her fear. She wasn't used to this level of danger, but she knew that if she didn't follow through, everything she had worked for, the trust she had earned, the risk she had taken, would be for nothing. The warehouse loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the night sky. It felt like a tomb, the air thick with the scent of salt water and decay. As they entered the building, the echo of their footsteps bounced off the cracked concrete floors. There was no turning back now. Dante led the way, his bodyguards close behind, and Tasha stayed close, keeping her senses alert. They moved in silence, past stacks of crates and metal beams, until they reached a small room at the far end of the warehouse. The door was slightly ajar, and Tasha could hear voices from inside. Low, murmured conversation, the sound of men discussing something important. "Stay here," Dante whispered, turning to her before slipping through the door. Tasha waited in the shadows, her heart pounding. She couldn't help but feel exposed, knowing that DeMarco and his men were so close. She had to trust Dante. She had no other choice. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. As she stood there, the sounds from inside the room growing clearer. "He's making the deal tonight," one voice said. "If everything goes as planned, we'll have full control." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. This was it, DeMarco's plan, the one that would change everything. She didn't know all the details yet, but she could tell this wasn't just a simple expansion of operations. This was something bigger, something that would put everyone in danger. "We move tomorrow," another voice said, and Tasha could hear the rustling of papers, the sound of a deal being made. The weight of the situation hit her like a wave. This wasn't just about stopping DeMarco anymore. This was about stopping a chain of events that could change everything. If she didn't act now, there would be no stopping what was coming. Without thinking, Tasha moved toward the door, her body tense with the knowledge that every step she took could be her last. She pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. She saw Dante, standing in front of DeMarco and several of his men, their faces shadowed in the dim light. DeMarco was seated at the table, his back straight, his eyes cold as he watched Dante. There was a moment of silence before DeMarco spoke, his voice low and menacing. "You really think you can stop me?" he said. Tasha could hear the amusement in his voice, the confidence that came from knowing he had the upper hand. Dante stood tall, his posture unwavering. "I've been patient," he said, his voice steady. "But you've crossed a line, DeMarco. I gave you a chance to play it straight, but now you're threatening everything I've built. It's time to end this." Tasha's heart pounded in her chest. The moment of confrontation was here. She had to make her move. Just as she was about to step forward, she heard a faint sound from behind her. A footstep, the soft shuffle of someone moving in the shadows. Before she could react, a hand clamped down on her shoulder, pulling her back into the dark. A figure emerged from the shadows. Marco. Tasha's mind raced. How had he found her here? She had trusted him, and now he was here, in the heart of the action, his face shadowed with uncertainty. "What are you doing?" Tasha whispered, her voice urgent. Marco's eyes flickered to the door, then back to her. "You can't stop this," he said quietly, his voice laced with panic. "DeMarco's too powerful. You'll all be dead before you can make a move." Tasha's heart sank as she realized that Marco had been right all along. DeMarco was a force they couldn't hope to take down without risking everything. But they had no choice now. The fight was on, and there was no turning back. As the voices from the room grew louder, Tasha made her decision. She couldn't let fear control her any longer. She had to act. Without another word, she pushed Marco aside and stepped into the room, facing the men who had just sealed their own fate. Tasha stood frozen for a moment, her heart hammering in her chest. She had stepped into the room, the confrontation unavoidable now. There was no turning back. DeMarco and his men were all staring at her, their expressions filled with confusion, disbelief, and a hint of danger. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew that staying in the shadows wasn't an option anymore. As the silence stretched on, Dante's voice cut through the tension. "I told you. DeMarco, you've crossed a line," he said coldly, his eyes locked on DeMarco, who now seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. DeMarco stood up from his chair slowly, his hands resting on the table, his eyes never leaving Tasha. "So, this is the little traitor you've been protecting?" DeMarco sneered. "You're in way over your head, girl." Tasha didn't flinch. She had come too far to be intimidated. "You're the one who's in over your head," she said, her voice steady. "You've been using people, betraying them for your own gain, and it ends tonight." DeMarco's eyes flashed with anger, but he remained composed. "You really think you can stop me? You and your little boyfriend here." He gestured to Dante, his smirk widening. "You're both just pawns in this game. It's too late for you to turn back now." Dante's gaze remained fixed on DeMarco, his jaw tightening. "I've been patient, waiting for the right moment. But I've seen enough. You've betrayed everyone, including your own men." He turned to his bodyguards, who stepped forward, weapons in hand. "Take them out." The room erupted into chaos. Tasha's instincts kicked in as she ducked behind a stack of crates. She heard the sound of gunfire, followed by shouting. It all happened so quickly, the gunfire echoing in her ears, the sharp tang of fear flooding her senses. Tasha stayed low, her mind racing. She had to stay focused. She had to find a way to stop this before it spiraled out of control. DeMarco's men were scrambling, trying to regroup, but Dante's team was already closing in, moving with the precision of well-trained operatives. Tasha didn't have time to think. She had a job to do. She moved swiftly through the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached the back of the room, she spotted Marco, crouched behind a table, his face pale. He was still alive, but there was no way of knowing how long that would last. He looked up at her with desperation in his eyes. "You don't have to do this," he whispered, his voice shaky. "You don't understand what DeMarco is capable of." Tasha shook her head, her eyes hardening. "I understand more than you think. This ends tonight." She moved toward him, her hand steady as she aimed at the lock on the door, preparing to leave no trace of their presence behind. Marco's fear intensified as she took a step toward him. "You can't kill him," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "DeMarco will come for you. He'll come for all of us. Tasha didn't answer. She just kept moving, her focus unbroken. She knew what had to be done. The room was a war zone now, but it wouldn't matter if they didn't stop DeMarco for good. As she made her way back toward the entrance, the sounds of gunfire seemed to die down. The battle was winding down, and the chaos was becoming more contained. DeMarco's men were either on the floor or retreating, and Dante's men were swiftly securing the area. Tasha's heart was still pounding in her chest, her adrenaline high. She could see Dante at the far end of the room, his eyes scanning the area, his focus sharp. He was the last man standing, as expected. DeMarco, however, was nowhere to be seen. Tasha quickly moved toward Dante, her steps deliberate. She didn't know what had happened to DeMarco, but she had a feeling the night wasn't over yet. Dante turned to her as she approached, his gaze calculating. "You did good," he said, his voice calm, but with a sense of approval. "But we're not done yet. DeMarco's still out there." Tasha's eyes darted around the room, but DeMarco was gone. "Where did he go?" she asked. "He's too slippery," Dante said, a bitter edge in his voice. "But we've got him cornered. He's running out of options." Just as he spoke, a loud crash came from the other side of the warehouse. Tasha tensed, instinctively reaching for her weapon. "Stay close," Dante ordered, his voice sharp. They moved quickly toward the source of the noise, knowing that DeMarco's last play was coming. As they turned the corner, they found DeMarco, standing at the edge of a broken window, looking out over the city. His back was to them, but the fear in his posture was clear. He knew he was trapped. "It's over, DeMarco," Dante said, his voice cold. "You've lost." DeMarco slowly turned, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You have no idea what you've started." Before either of them could react, DeMarco reached for something hidden in his coat. Without thinking, Tasha reacted. She raised her weapon and fired, the sound of the shot ringing out sharply in the quiet room. DeMarco staggered back, his body jerking as he collapsed to the ground. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Tasha felt a mix of relief and disbelief wash over her. It was over. DeMarco was dead, and the threat was finally gone. But as she stood there, staring down at his lifeless body, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The world she had stepped into wasn't finished with her yet. There was no going back now. As Dante approached her, his expression unreadable, he spoke quietly. "You did well, Tasha. You've proven yourself tonight. But this world, it changes people. Be careful." Tasha looked at him, her mind still processing everything that had just happened. She had made it out alive, but at what cost? The game had changed, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for the next level. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back. Not now, not ever.